Fellas, last night we had UFC 308, a crazy card. I'd say it's one of the best pay-per-views we've had this year. A ton of memorable moments, a ton of talking points to come from this card. So we're going to be ranking every single fight to come from this card, from the prelims all up until the main card, because there were some fights on this card that were memorable, that were impressive, that were great fights. And there were also some fights on this card that were so forgettable, or just a shit ton of bad moments throughout the card that need to be talked about. So we're going to be ranking every single one of these fights on a tier list from ST to DT. You can see the fights arranged in chronological order from the bottom. And we'll start with the first fight on the card, which was Fakhretdinov versus Neal. Now, for the fight itself, I'd put the fight in a B tier just purely for the fight itself, because it was a good fight. It was back and forth. I mean, Fakhretdinov's got this really unorthodox striking style. He wasn't able to take Carlos to the ground, so it ended up being a quite fun little scrap on the feet. Neal basically piecing up Fakhretdinov for the first two rounds, and then he tended to be a bit gassed at the end, which is where Rinat started to land. So the fight itself, I'd say it was a B tier. Great way to start off the card, but the main talking point to come from this fight, and I think you know where I'm heading to, is the decision. I still don't understand what the judges were thinking. There was a judge that gave this 30-27 to Fakhretdinov, which might have been the worst scorecard in UFC history, even worse than Rosenstrike versus Tuivasa. So for that reason, the fight is going to have to go down to C tier. Not the fighter's fault, but just because this fight was memorable for the wrong reason. It might have been the biggest robbery in UFC history. I said it on the community post yesterday. A lot of people agreed online. This card, to start off the card in Abu Dhabi with a robbery this bad, was a bad way to start off the card. It was a good fight. It wasn't a boring fight. A lot of people thought Fakhretdinov were just going to hold Neal against the cage and it was going to be a bit of a slugfest. It was actually quite fun to see. Good little scrap. But because of how bad the decision was, and the judge that gave it 30-27, I was terrified, bro. I thought the rest of the card were going to get a bunch of bad decisions. I was terrified if Whittaker was going to go to a decision with Chimaev, or if Rakic was going to go to a decision with Ankalaev, just in case they were going to get robbed. So Fakhretdinov versus Neal, good fight, but because of how bad the decision was, that's going to bring it down a peg, down to C tier. It can't be D tier. D tier has to be like terrible, and there's definitely a few fights that make it into D tier, but Fakhretdinov versus Neal, I'm going to put it in C tier. Then we had Basharat versus Victor Hugo. I'll put this one in C tier as well. Wasn't really a memorable fight. I mean, Victor Hugo's quite fun to see. He's got quite a wild striking style, and he's got good jiu-jitsu. So there are a few times where he landed something on the feet against Basharat, wobbled him a little bit, and he had a couple submission attempts as well. But apart from that, it was mainly just Basharat landing leg kicks, just moving around, keeping distance, and then eventually imposing his wrestling on Victor Hugo. Not much talking points to take from this fight. I mean, it's good that we have a new undefeated prospect in the bantamweight division in Basharat. It wasn't an amazing fight. It wasn't a war. And plus, halfway, like for basically half the fight, all the commentary we're talking about was the fact that Victor Hugo missed weight. And I get it, it was a massive weight miss, but yeah, there just weren't too much memorable stuff to come from this fight. Basharat picked up a decision. I'll put that one in C tier. Then we had Nardev versus Silva. This was terrible, man. I'm going to put this in D tier. I think this was before Basharat, actually. That was a terrible fight. I mean, it was Nardev basically holding Silva against the cage and slightly doing better on the feet. There was no crowd because it was like the second fight in the card. Silva messed my parlay up. I don't know what his game plan was. He looked like he didn't want to be there. Like, Silva fought as if he didn't want to be there. They say you fight to win or you fight to not lose. It looked like Silva wasn't trying to fight at all. He didn't even want to be there. He just let Nardev back himself up. Didn't really throw anything offensively on the feet. Didn't threat anything. No feints. No nothing. Looked like he had no will to fight. Maybe now we can see him versus Fabian Edwards in Bellator. Who knows? Because I don't want to see him in the UFC. Terrible fight. Boring. Nothing against Nardev. He did what he needed to do. Got back in the UFC. Got the win over Silva. But wasn't an entertaining fight. Wasn't memorable, and if it was memorable, it was only that because of the wrong reason. So I'm going to put that in D tier. Then we had Barnett versus Nchukwi. I'm going to put that in C tier. I mean, I never want to see Barnett lose. He's one of the funnest. By the way, this is a bad start to the card. I know this makes the card look terrible after I've just said it's a good pay-per-view, but trust me, the card does get better. But no, Kennedy versus Barnett. To be fair, the fight wasn't that bad. But I think Barnett injured himself by jumping in the Bruce Buffer introduction, which was a terrible way to injure yourself. It reminded me of Brian Ortega a few years ago as well. But no, I never want to see Barnett lose because he's one of the few unranked heavyweights out there that's kind of fun. He's got a good personality, good walkout, fun, charismatic, but most importantly, he's got like the most athletic style for a 5'9" guy. I mean, this was always going to happen. Kennedy was always going to win. Barnett injured himself again. I think he injured himself against Martin Badai as well. Kennedy got the win. It's good that we've now got Kennedy in the heavyweight division to mix things up a little bit, but there's not really any major talking points from this fight apart from Barnett getting injured, so for that reason, I've got to put it in C tier. Then we had Bruno Fakhretdinov versus Abbas Magomedov. I'm going to put this fight in B tier. I mean, this was really frustrating to see from a Bruno Fakhretdinov fan, most importantly, but it was a really good fight. Abbas Magomedov was doing the better on the feet at the beginning in that first round, kind of piecing up Bruno Fakhretdinov. And then in the second round, Bruno Fakhretdinov had multiple moments. We know him as being one of the most powerful middleweights on the planet, and he landed on Abbas Magomedov, dropped him a couple of times, and wobbled him a little bit. But then he kept frustrating him every single time he had Abbas Magomedov wobbled. Rather than trying to go for a finish on the feet and trying to get the finish on the feet, he just kept going for the same spinning elbow attack that he's been doing his entire UFC career. It would have frustrated him because he went for the spinning elbow, ended up having to give up position because of it and let Abbas Magomedov get control time. And then in the third round as well, he was en route to finishing Abbas Magomedov, and if he weren't going to finish him, he was going to win the fight by decision. And then again, when he had Abbas Magomedov wobbled, he went for a spinning elbow, and this time it caused him to get put in an arm triangle and submitted, which was frustrating to see because he really could have won this fight. But the fight was a good fight. It was always going to be a good fight. I mean, you've got one of the most powerful middleweights on the planet in Bruno Fakhretdinov versus Abbas Magomedov. I expected it to be good. I expected it to be a bit of a slugfest in that third round because neither of these guys are known for having the best stamina. Good win for Abbas Magomedov. He did exactly what he needed to do. But Bruno Fakhretdinov, the dude can train everything, but he can't train fight IQ because that was a terrible... I mean, I just don't understand what he was thinking, going for a spinning elbow every single time he had Magomedov rock. But it was a good fight. I think it was the best fight on the card so far. Good scrap. Multiple times where I thought the fight was going to end. So for Bruno Fakhretdinov versus Abbas Magomedov, I'm going to put that one in B tier. And then we have not only the fight of the night, not only the fight of the month, but possibly the greatest fight we've had in UFC in 2024. I'm going to take it a step further. Of all time, Rumbetsky versus Mitabek. What a fight. What a fight Rumbetsky versus Mitabek was. It was just, I mean, that first round, up until the end of the fight, it was crazy, especially that second round as well, because they were both bloody. I mean, Rumbetsky had like a massive cut, not a cut, but he had like a massive swelling under his left eye, I think it was. Rumbetsky was getting beaten as well. And it was just an absolute dogfight between the two of them. And then I think it was that second or that third round where Mitabek he had a massive swelling on his face. He was bloody. He was bruised. He got dropped by Rumbetsky, literally a second away from getting finished. He had nothing left in the gas tank, and then he made a massive comeback, started landing on Rumbetsky. And in that third round, they both just looked like walking corpses. It literally looked like they'd had absolutely nothing left. Their face was falling off. They had nothing left. They were cut up. They were throwing everything. Any significant strike would have put either of them out in that third round. It was a bloodbath. It was definitely the best fight on the card, in my opinion, from an entertainment standpoint. And it's going to go in the UFC Hall of Fame, in my opinion, as one of the best fights ever, because that, for a three-rounder as well, I don't think anyone really expected that from Mitabek and Rumbetsky as well, because Orobai was always seen as one of these kind of like relentless grapplers that wants to hold you against the cage and do enough on the feet. But he really showed his toughness in this fight against Rumbetsky, who we always knew was a fun fighter. He had a fun fight against Eegun in his last one. Definitely the fight of the night for the prelims. I hope they both got a bonus, because that, in my opinion, was the fight of the night. It was just a bloody back and forth. It had everything you could possibly want in a fight. A massive comeback from Mitabek as well. Rumbetsky did enough and got the correct decision as well. So Mitabek versus Rumbetsky, in my opinion, has to make S tier. And then the momentum kind of slowed down a bit because we had Rafael dos Anjos versus Jeff Neal, which I have no choice but to put it in D tier. I mean, the fight started off quite well, as we expected. Jeff Neal just outboxed him. Rafael dos Anjos dropped him. And it was looking like the way that fight was going, that Jeff Neal, regardless of the injury, was going to get a finish in that first round anyway, which is what we all thought was going to happen coming into it, because this matchmaking was terrible. Rafael dos Anjos eventually gets, I think he got caught by a big left straight or right straight by what's his name, Jeff Neal, until eventually his knee popped out or something, or his knee blew out. So we got injured in the first round, and because he got injured in the first round and there's no talking points from this fight, I can't really put it anything higher than a D tier. And the matchmaking was bad as well. It's good to see Jeff Neal back in the winning column. I hope we see him versus somebody like Gilbert Burns next. And Jeff Neal was piecing him up at the beginning of the fight, so it wasn't like we had absolutely no idea who was going to win. We knew what was going to happen. It just ended in an unfortunate way. So because of that, I can't really put an injury win above a D tier, in my opinion. Then we had Aslan versus Sakara. I'm going to put this one in. I'll put this one in A tier and B tier as well. This was a really good fight. Actually, no, I'm going to put this one in A tier. For this card standard, I'll put this one in A tier. That was a really quick finish by Aslan. It reminded me a lot of Sergey Pavlovich, how he takes his time for a couple of minutes, just reads the opponents, and then immediately, the second he lands one big shot, he just goes in for the kill, and that's exactly what Aslan did. Got Sakara against the cage, and just a barrage of punches, just hook after hook after hook after uppercut. Basically just held him against the cage and just let it all out, had an absolute onslaught on Sakara, got the finish against the cage, was seconds away from putting his lights out as well. Multiple big shots that wobbled him in that fight, and it was just a really quick finish. The fight started, he got him against the cage, and he went for the finish. Reminded me of Sergey Pavlovich, and for the card's sake, so far, I've got to put it in 80. A quick finish by Aslan, proved himself as a good prospect in the light heavyweight division, and he's someone that you want to see again, and I think he's a big star in Turkey as well, which is why he got moved to the featured prelim. And then we progressed onto the main card with Sharaputtin Magomedov versus Arman Petrosian. This is going straight into A tier. I might even move into S tier later on in the card, but no, this was a really good way to start off the main card. It was always going to be a good fight because you've got two high-level kickboxers. This was the toughest fight of Sharaputtin Magomedov's career so far, facing Arman Petrosian. And the first round, Arman Petrosian didn't do that bad, to be fair. He was landing a lot of good leg kicks on Sharaputtin Magomedov. I think there was one time where he landed a nice right hand on Sharaputtin Magomedov, momentarily stunned him. But the fight ended up going in Sharaputtin Magomedov's favour, just slashed him with the leg kicks, a bunch of crafty kicks, which we expected from Sharaputtin Magomedov, one of the best kickers in the middleweight division, and we knew that from his UFC debut against Bruno Silva as well. It was just a really good kickboxing fight, back and forth, until eventually Sharaputtin Magomedov found the pace, and then that finish, double spinning back fist. I don't think we've ever seen that in UFC history. Hits Arman Petrosian with a spinning back fist, and then immediately with the opposing hand, another spinning back fist, and knocks him out cold. One of the best knockouts of 2024 so far. Definitely one of the best knockouts, if not the best knockout of the night, because I know the main event had a good knockout as well. So for Sharaputtin Magomedov versus Arman Petrosian, going in A tier, and I feel like Sharaputtin Magomedov needed that as well, because in his last couple of performances against Mikhail and Antonio Tricole, a lot of people were calling him a can crusher, saying that he's never going to be anything in the UFC because he couldn't really finish these kind of cans. But now that he's done that to Arman Petrosian, I feel like he's getting a bit of hype. People want to see him again, and he's a really fun striker. He is everything you want in a striker, is Sharaputtin Magomedov. So great finish, good fight. I'm putting that straight into A tier. And then we had Lerone Murphy versus Dan Ige. I'm going to put this in B tier. I think this was a good fight. The crowd were pretty much dead the entire fight because there wasn't really hype going into the fight. And it's in Abu Dhabi. In Abu Dhabi, you could have an absolute war on, and the crowd would do nothing. I remember the last Abu Dhabi card, I think it was, or Saudi Arabia, where we had Nasrat Hakparas versus Jared Gordon. It was an absolute war, and the crowd said nothing. But no, Lerone Murphy versus Dan Ige, this was a really good fight. He had a perfect mix of grappling and striking. In that first round, I think it was the first round anyway, Lerone Murphy got caught by a massive shot by Dan Ige, was seconds away from getting finished. Dan Ige had a really good first round, but in that second round, that's where Lerone Murphy started to pick up the pace. Started landing some nice leg kicks and some nice combinations on Dan Ige. Dan Ige couldn't really get his boxing going in that second round. Lerone Murphy takes him down a couple of times, and then that third round, it was basically both of them going at it. I mean, Lerone Murphy was on track to winning in the beginning of the third round. Then Dan Ige takes over, takes Lerone Murphy down, and then Lerone Murphy gets back up, then takes Dan Ige down, and then towards the end of the fight, like the last 20 seconds, he just started throwing it all out there. It was an underrated fight, in my opinion. Not a lot of people are talking about it. It hasn't got the most hype. I don't really think I can put it in 80, since nothing really significant apart from Lerone Murphy getting dropped came from the fight. But it was a fun fight as it lasted. It was it tested Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy was proven as a good prospect in the featherweight division, so I can't really say anything bad about this fight. I'll put it in B tier. And then we had Magomedov Ankalaev versus Alexander Rakic. I'm going to put this fight in C tier. I mean, the stakes were high for this fight, which is why I kind of feel bad put it in C tier, because it is a #1 contender fight, and this kind of did secure Magomedov Ankalaev his title shot against Poton, but nobody was looking at this fight going, well, I think everyone was... When initially this got announced, people were saying that Magomedov Ankalaev needs to make a statement-making performance to show Poton that he's worthy, because Poton keeps going out there having these amazing performances. Ankalaev's viewed as boring. So he needs to have this statement-making performance, and he didn't really do that tonight. Nothing significant from this fight. It was just simply Magomedov Ankalaev outstriking Alexander Rakic for the majority of the fight. A couple of times he'd land a big shot on Rakic. Rakic couldn't get going, as he can never do, which is why I assume most people picked Ankalaev to win this fight. Rakic shot a takedown in that third round. Ankalaev defended it successfully. I mean, the positives, Ankalaev's in the winning column. It wasn't a terrible fight, and he's now going to be fighting for the belt, but there was absolutely nothing memorable to come from this fight. I expected it to be better than it was. I expected Rakic to be doing a little bit better. I expected maybe Ankalaev to show his ground game, but I'll put it in C tier. Bit forgettable. Ankalaev, nothing significant came from this fight, but he's going to be fighting Poton next. And then we had the co-main in the main event. Khamzat Chimaev submitting Robert Whittaker. I'm going to put that in A tier. I mean, I don't think there was any way this fight was not going to make it at least in A tier or S tier. Chimaev proved himself. I mean, a lot of people were saying that Chimaev's never going to be anything crazy in the UFC after his last couple of fights. I mean, he went into war with Gilbert Burns. He missed weight against Nate Diaz. And then he went out there in his last fight against Usman and had a very close, controversial fight. And I feel like he needed this big win against Robert Whittaker, because this was his toughest test so far. And a lot of people, including myself, picked Whittaker to win this fight, and he just took him down in about 10-15 seconds. Eventually got the back of Whittaker, got him in a neck crank, and broke his jaw within about 1 second of being in a neck crank. Didn't even give him much time. The second he latched up that neck crank, he broke Whittaker's jaw. And Chimaev's got to be terrifying. I can't see anyone really beating Chimaev in the middleweight division. Even if you give him like a high-level grappler like Anthony Hernandez or Brendan Allen, I can't see anyone really surviving Chimaev. He's gained himself a shit ton of height for this performance. He's proved himself title-worthy. And I think this fight should have secured Chimaev a title shot, in my opinion. So, Chimaev versus Whittaker. It's sad to see he's a Whittaker fan because you want to see Whittaker do well. But because of how Chimaev proved himself and the fact that he just took him down and ended it so early, I've got to put that one in A tier. And then for the main event, Topuria versus Holloway. This is going straight in S tier. I mean, we'll talk about Topuria in a second, but the fight itself was really good. That first round, Topuria showed why he's so dangerous. I mean, he was walking towards Holloway, backing him up against the cage. And that first round, I'd say Holloway was doing the better for the majority of the fight, but Topuria had more moments. He clocked Holloway at one point in the first round, took him, got a double leg takedown as well against Max Holloway. I think Holloway tripped as well towards the end of the first round, but most people thought it was a knockdown. Second round, pretty much the similar thing, but Holloway started to land a couple of shots now. He started landing some nice shots on Topuria. Started attacking Topuria's leg as well. And Holloway was definitely doing the better in that second round. Topuria was still looking like he was trying to set something up. And then in that third round, the big KO came. Topuria did exactly what we thought he was going to do. Backed Holloway against the cage, landed a big right hand. Holloway was wobbled, wasn't out immediately. And then eventually, within about 15 seconds later, Topuria just walked him down, landed a combination on Holloway. Eventually went up top, landed that chin, cracked the chin of Max Holloway, and knocked him out cold. Topuria's going to be one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the UFC right now. In my opinion, top pound-for-pound number 3, potentially fight of the year. What this dude has achieved is like no other. Imagine telling an MMA fan in 2022 or 2023 that there was going to be a guy who was going to go undefeated in the UFC, knock out Alexander Volkanovski for the featherweight belt, and then go and knock out and be the first guy to knock out Max Holloway in the immediate fight after for a title defense. No one would have believed you. What Topuria's done is amazing. I don't think anyone expected him to knock Max Holloway out in the fashion that he did. And I think he's proven himself as one of the most dangerous fighters. And I don't even mind the fight with Makhachev. Obviously, I want to see him defend his belt a bit more against the likes of Diego Lopez and people like that. But if down the line the Topuria versus Makhachev fight happens, I don't even mind that fight. It kind of excites me. Topuria's a massive star. He just made a massive statement making win against Max Holloway. I'm putting that fight in ST. But that is me ranking every fight after UFC Abu Dhabi. Let me know your thoughts on this card and how the fight's performed. Let me know if you agree with the rankings as well. And thank you for watching.